Imagine a sleek billion-dollar suspension bridge in some sun-baked corner of the developing world, its cables gleaming with fresh polymer coatings, sensors blinking like the eyes of a watchful AI. It lasts barely 2 decades before corrosion gnaws through the stays. Wind shear twists the deck like a tin can lid, and the whole edifice sags under its own programmed fragility. Now picture the Golden Gate Bridge, that rust-red colossus straddling the snarling mouth of San Francisco Bay. Born in the gut punch of the Great Depression, it has shrugged off 9 decades of Pacific gales howling at 100 miles per hour, earthquakes that would pulverize modern concrete dreams, and the relentless salt-laced fog that devours lesser steel. Its main cables, each a throbbing artery of 27,572 individual wires, still bear the load of 10 lanes of traffic, millions of tourists, and the inexorable weight of time itself, without a single full replacement. This is no accident of luck. The men who forged it knew a brutal alchemy we have unlearned, how to spin immortality from raw peril, strand by strand, high above an abyss that claimed the careless. We live in an age that worships the spreadsheet, where engineers with MBAs crunch finite element analyses on glowing screens, optimizing for cost efficiency and life cycle ROI. They design for obsolescence, because a bridge that lasts forever starves the replacement cycle. Plastic composites, lightweight alloys, computer-modeled pretensions. These are the toys of a civilization too soft to grasp the first law of true endurance. Mass defeats entropy. But cross the Golden Gate on a stormy dawn. Feel the deck heave under your feet, not in weakness, but in defiant harmony with the wind's fury. And you sense the ghost of forgotten mastery. The past didn't just build a bridge. It wrestled physics into submission with hands calloused by fire and frost. We forgot because we chose comfort over competence, profit over permanence. Those cables aren't mere cables. They are the steel-trap legacy of men who stared into the maw of impossibility and spat back a span that mocks our fragility. The crisis that birthed this beast was no mere engineering puzzle. It was survival incarnate, forged in the bone-dry despair of 1933 America. The Great Depression had clawed the nation to its knees, breadlines snaked through every city, farms turned to dust bowls under merciless suns, banks evaporating overnight like morning mist. San Francisco, that fog-shrouded boomtown turned beggar, choked on its own isolation. North of the Bay, Marin County's riches, timber, dairies, untapped real estate, mocked the starving South. Ferries groaned under the strain, their schedules a lottery of fog and tide, stranding workers who clawed their way across the water only to return to empty supper tables. A tunnel? Laughable. The currents below churned like a living mill race, swallowing ships whole. A tunnel under the bay. Engineering hubris that would bankrupt empires. No, the only path forward was over the void. A suspension bridge spanning 4,200 feet from shore to shore, with a central chasm of 1,280 meters, the longest ever attempted, dwarfing all prior spans by half again. Failure wasn't an option. It was annihilation. President Hoover's ghost still haunted the White House. FDR's New Deal dangled jobs like bait, but this project was do-or-die economics. Engineer Joseph Strauss, a bulldog visionary with a poet's fatalism, promised not just connection but resurrection. 4,000 men, most unemployed, many ex-miners or riveters from defunct shipyards, signed on for wages that barely staved off starvation. They weren't volunteers for glory. They were the damned trading 75 cents an hour for a slim shot at dignity. The bay's physics conspired against them from the start. Winds that flayed skin raw, tides surging with the force of derailed freight trains, fog so thick it turned day to dusk. And the cables, God, the cables. Each main cable needed to hoist 11,000 tons of deck, towers piercing 746 feet skyward like defiant obelisks. But here's the paradox that broke lesser minds. Those cables weighed as much as a battleship's anchor chain. No ship afloat could haul them from Pittsburgh Mills. No rail line could snake them intact across the continent. Transport was suicide. The only salvation? Spin them on site, wire by wire, in the roaring vacuum between the towers. This wasn't theory. It was a gauntlet thrown down to gravity itself. Strauss's team drew from the ghosts of Brooklyn and Williamsburg bridges, but scaled to apocalypse. Picture the setup. 2 colossal towers, each 25,000 tons of granite-faced steel, muscled into place by derricks that creaked like dying giants. Then the catwalks, narrow swaying ribbons of wire mesh, 220 meters above the Pacific's icy churn. These were no safety rails for the timid. They were arenas for the elemental. Gales whipped up from the Golden Gate Strait, slamming the walks with hurricane force, turning them into pendulums of nausea. Workers clipped in with bosun's chairs, hearts pounding as the void yawned below, sharks circling the whitecaps like patient reapers. Yet they came, day after day, because hunger bites harder than fear. The nation watched, radios crackling with updates, as this Depression-era gamble became a flickering beacon of can-do in a world of can't. But beneath the newsreels lurked the truth. This bridge demanded blood tribute. Men plummeted before the nets went up, smashed on rocky shores or gulped by currents. Fazer ou morrer, as the Portuguese riveters muttered, do or die. And they did, strand by searing strand. In that crucible, the old iron whispered its secrets, techniques honed in the forges of the Gilded Age, before CAD and compliance checklists neutered craftsmanship. The spinning wheels, massive traveling carriages, each powered by electric motors straining against inertia's grudge, shuttled back and forth 14,000 times per cable. But the magic, the visceral sorcery, lay in the human grip on chaos. Word count 872. Each of those 27,572 strands, thin as a mechanic's pencil, yet forged from high-carbon steel in the roaring Bessemer converters of Pennsylvania mills, was no passive filament, but a tensile monster, capable of withstanding 200,000 pounds per square inch before yielding to rupture. They arrived by rail in colossal bundles, uncoiled like serpents from Hades, each wire galvanized against the bay's corrosive breath, its zinc sheath a sacrificial armor that would blister and flake over decades while the core endured. But endurance began not in the mill, but in the air, where physics' raw appetite demanded conquest. The spinning wheels, those 150-ton behemoths suspended from temporary saddles atop the towers, were the heart of the beast. Twin drums, 9 feet across, rotating at 300 revolutions per minute, hauling loops of wire from shore-based supply reels across the 1,280-meter gulf. Inertia fought them like a chained leviathan, the motors groaning under torque that could twist axles like licorice, while centrifugal force hurled oil and sparks into the gale. Yet the true alchemy, the forgotten incantation of the old iron masters, resided in the manual bundling, the pulo do gato that no algorithm today dares replicate. Computers simulate tension fields with sterile precision, but they cannot feel the wire's soul. Haulers on the catwalks, swaying 220 meters above the abyss, didn't merely thread, they wrestled. Picture it. A bundle of 61 strands forming the first rope fed into the wheel's throat, emerging on the far tower as a nascent cable, taut as a bowstring under 10,000 tons of counterweight tension. But perfection demanded iteration, layer upon layer. 452 such ropes woven into 7 nested helices, each helix misaligned by precise angles to foil shear stresses from wind and quake, until the full cable swelled to 92 centimeters in diameter, a throbbing cylinder heavier than a blue whale's heart. The secret? Hand-guided alignment. Operators, clipped to the mesh like mountaineers on El Capitan, used wooden mallets and rawhide gloves to nudge each wire into registry. No lasers, no servos, just the calibrated thump of oak on steel, eyes judging catenary sag against plumb lines whipping in the fog, hands sensing vibration harmonics that spelled doom or divinity. One errant strand, kinked or loose, and the whole edifice would unzip under load, cables sloughing like flayed muscle. This wasn't assembly line drudgery. It was a symphony of forces in brutal equilibrium. Tension clawed at compression. The outer wires bore the lion's share of wind load, their helical twist distributing torque like veins in granite, while inner cores crushed inward under hydraulic preload. A pressure of 400 tons per square inch applied not by distant pumps, but by manual screwjacks and levered presses, manned by teams rotating in 8-hour hells. Heat from friction welds fused overlaps invisibly, while the Pacific's chill contracted the mass into unyielding density, time geologically compressed, as if eons of tectonic grind had been distilled into this steel braid. The towers themselves, those 746-foot sentinels of Sierra granite clad in riveted plate girders, anchored it all, each leg a hollow colossus filled with concrete slurry poured in lifts, curing under the weight of its own ambition, rebites driven white-hot by pneumatic hammers that spat molten stars into the void. And oh, the visceral peril embedded in every fiber, the armadillo de aso, the steel trap that gave the cables their mythic name. A snapped wire didn't flutter. It lashed like a guillotine blade traveling at 200 miles per hour, slicing flesh from bone with the indifference of a scythe through wheat. During spinning, strands parted under fatigue or flaw, whipping across the catwalk to decapitate or eviscerate. One such lash in 1935 nearly bisected a hauler, his torso held together only by suspenders until medics stitched him into the half-hitch to Hell Club. The air hummed with this menace, every mallet strike a wager against catastrophe, every bundle pass a flirtation with the reaper. Yet the men, Irish derrickmen, Portuguese riveters, Oki refugees, pressed on, their forearms veined like root systems from gripping chilled steel, lungs seared by diesel fumes and ozone from arcing generators. They spat tobacco into the wind, muttered litanies to saints of iron, and built not for posterity's plaque, but because the alternative was the breadline's slow death. In this anatomy throbbed the philosophy of the pharaoh Antigo, machines as extensions of mortal will, demanding sacrifice for immortality. Modern pretenders, carbon fiber stays tensioned by hydraulic jacks calibrated to femtometer tolerances, boast lighter spans, but shatter under the same gales that caress the Golden Gate's cables like old lovers. Why? Because we forsook the hand's wisdom for the spreadsheet's lie. Those 27,572 strands compacted without a weld's weakness derive strength from multiplicity and imperfection annealed by human touch. Today's cables, extruded in sterile factories, prioritize efficiency over excess, skimping on redundancy until the first microfracture cascades to collapse. We measure success in quarters, not quarters of a millennium, forgetting that true engineering courts entropy with mass and margin, not minimization. The Golden Gate's cables don't just suspend, they testify. Peril forges permanence, and the beast endures because it was birthed in blood's forge, strand by unyielding strand. But the men who tamed this steel leviathan were no abstractions on blueprints. They were flesh-forged in the same fire as the wires they bound, their lives the unyielding counterweight to the bridge's eternity. Picture them, 4,000 souls drawn from the Depression's wreckage, hulking Irish boilermakers with fists like sledgehammers, wiry Portuguese riveters whose accents thickened under strain, dust-choked Okies fleeing blackened prairies, ex-loggers from redwood clearcuts whose shoulders bore the ghosts of felled titans. They weren't elite technicians in hard hats and harnesses. They were the proletariat's vanguard, paid 75 cents an hour to defy a physics that devoured the unwary. 8-hour shifts blurred into marathons under Strauss's iron regime, bodies slick with sweat that froze into rime on catwalks where the wind clawed at 70 knots, turning fingers numb as stone mallets struck sparks from chilled steel. Safety? A cruel jest. Before the nets, the abyss claimed 11 outright, plummeting 220 meters to explode on jagged shoals or vanish into the Pacific's maw. Bodies never recovered, just echoes in coroners' ledgers. Then came the innovation born of necessity. Wire mesh safety nets, slung like hammocks between towers, each a 3 8-inch cable web spanning 25 feet high, 1 to 100 feet across, costing a month's wages per square yard. Strauss decreed them mandatory, clipping workers like baitfish to this gossamer bulwark. 23 fell into those nets that April morning in 1937, when a scaffold sheared away. The halfway to hell club, they called themselves, ribs cracked, legs pulped, lungs filled with brine spray, yet alive to toast their resurrection in dive bars overlooking the span. One, Hard Hat Harry, a moniker earned decades early, dangled 15 minutes before rescue, his screams lost to the gale, emerging with a spine twisted like baling wire but a grin that mocked mortality. These weren't accidents sanitized by OSHA manuals. They were sacraments, blood oaths sealing the pact between man and mass. Up close, the work was intimate savagery. Haulers on the spinning wheels didn't delegate to joysticks. They manhandled 61-strand bundles, each weighing a quarter-ton, feeding them into grooved drums that spun with the fury of derailed locomotives. Gloves shredded weakly from friction burns that wept plasma, forearms swelling to twice their girth from repetitive torque, repetitive strain injury a badge, not a lawsuit. The travelers, those 150-ton carriages shuttling the Gulf 14,000 times per cable, bucked under unbalanced loads. Operators inside cabined cockpits wrestled levers slick with oil and vomit, countering inertia's grudge with muscle memory honed in coal pits and rail yards. One misfeed, and wires tangled in cat's cradles. Halting the wheel mid-span, crews rappelling down swaying strands to untangle by headlamp, hammers probing for flaws in the dark while fog muffled their curses. Riveters on the towers faced their own inferno. White-hot rivets born in gas forges below hurtled skyward in buckets slung from block and tackle, glowing like fallen suns at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Buckers caught them in leather mitts, slamming them into holes with pneumatic guns that hammered at 2,000 blows per minute, vibration shuddering bones to marrow jelly, heat blistered faces into leather, flash burns scarring retinas, yet precision ruled. Each rivet 1.5 inches diameter, driven home with a pneumatic snap that echoed like rifle cracks, cooling to shrink-lock the plates into monolithic defiance. A single loose rivet, and shear forces would unzip a leg, sending 25,000-ton towers into the drink. These men ate lunch perched on girders narrower than boot soles, 700 feet aloft, legs dangling over eternity, thermos coffee turning to ice as gales howled psalms of peril. Philosophy shadowed every shift. The Pharaoh Antigo demanded not just skill, but submission, bodies as the final machine in the chain. Inertia wasn't a vector on paper. It was the ghost of dead comrades yanking at your harness. Tension didn't compute. It thrummed in veins like war drums, demanding attunement or death. These workers respected the beast because they fed it their essence, sweat evaporating into the fog, blood speckling wires like rust's prelude, exhaustion carving hollows under eyes that still scanned for the whip crack of parting steel. No diversity quotas or ergonomic audits. Survival winnowed the weak, leaving legends whose calluses etched the cable's soul. Strauss called them my brave boys, but they knew the truth. The bridge wasn't built despite their frailty. It endured because of it, human will compressing chaos into permanence, strand by sacrificial strand. Contrast this visceral forge with today's charade. Modern crews swaddled in Tyvek suits and sensor-laden vests operate from climate-controlled pods, drones scouting flaws while algorithms predict failures we preempt with replacements. They build for compliance, not conquest. Cables of extruded high-strength, low-alloy steel, pre-stressed in factories to exacting FEM models, lighter by 30% but brittle under cyclic fatigue. A Golden Gate pretender in Dubai or Shanghai snaps after 20 years, its polymer sheaths peeling like sunburnt skin because we optimized out the excess. No 27,572-fold redundancy, no hand-forged helices to distribute quake torque like muscle fibers. Profit decrees disposability. A bridge lasting 900 years bankrupts the consultants. Yet those depression haulers whisper from the cables, true endurance exacts human toll, and we recoil because our hands, softened by silicon, can no longer grasp the iron truth. That immortality is paid in pounding hearts, not pixels. The Golden Gate stands not as monument, but indictment. We traded mastery for mediocrity, forgetting that the greatest spans are bridged by men who danced with death daily. That indictment echoes across the decades, a rust-red specter mocking the gleaming mirages we erect today in boardrooms and Silicon Valleys. Step into the 21st century's engineering sanctum, vast server farms humming with finite element models, where MBAs in slim-fit suits dictate spans from PowerPoint decks, optimizing not for eternity, but for EBITDA margins shaved to the bone. The Golden Gate's cables, those hand-woven titans of 27,572 strands, represent a heresy against this creed. We ceased forging such beasts not from necessity's decree, but from a willful atrophy, a collective surrender to the soft tyrannies of cost, compliance, and convenience. Planned obsolescence isn't a conspiracy. It's doctrine enshrined in building codes that prioritize quarterly audits over quaternary endurance. A bridge that outlives its financiers. Economic sabotage. So we birthed the disposable era, where steel yields to composites lighter than regret, and mastery dissolves in the acid bath of efficiency. Witness the autopsy of modernity's frailty. Today's pretenders, say the Akashi Kaikyo in Japan or the Millau Viaduct in France, boast cables of parallel strand construction, extruded in climate-controlled factories from high-tensile, low-alloy steels, each bundle a sterile extrusion of 127mm monoliths wrapped in polyethylene sheaths. No catwalks, no mallets thumping against inertia's grudge. Instead, massive spooler cranes lower prefabbed halls from tower tops, tensioned by computer-controlled jacks humming to GPS-calibrated catenaries. The physics seems tamed, lighter by 40%, deflection minimized via algorithmic pre-stress, sensors embedded like nervous ticks monitoring strain gauges in real time. Yet peel back the veneer, and entropy laughs last. Eolt fog corrodes the wax coatings in a decade, micro-pitting the cores until ultrasonic scans scream, retrofit. Wind-induced aeroelastic flutter, vortex shedding that once danced with the Golden Gate's helical mass, now amplifies in these featherweight arrays, demanding tuned dampers the size of shipping containers. Earthquakes? Modern simulations predict, but the fleshless precision cracks first. A 7.2 Tembler unzips parallel strands like zipper teeth, while the Golden Gate's nested ropes share the torque across millennia of redundancy. The villainy crystallized post-World War II, when the old iron's blood price became untenable, in a welfare state fattened on assembly lines. OSHA's 1970 birth edict, noble in intent, Faustian in execution, banned the catwalk ballet, mandating full-body harnesses, edge guards, and fall arrest systems that balloon costs by 300%. No more halfway to hell clubs. Now a slipped lanyard triggers lawsuits fatter than depression paychecks, halting projects for root cause analyses that bury boldness in bureaucracy. Safety morphed from earned sacrament to outsourced insurance, pricing manual spinning beyond budgets swollen by liability premiums. Unions, once Forge Brothers, devolved into grievance mills, striking for air-conditioned cabs over abyss exposure. And the engineers? No longer haulers with plumb bobs in their veins, but PhDs in computational fluidity dynamics, glued to MATLAB scripts that iterate 10 more 6 nodal points but blind to the wire's whisper, the subtle harmonic that signaled kinks to calloused palms. The pulo do gato, that hand-nudged alignment of strands into torque-defying helices, vanished with the riveter's retirement. Robots can't feel the sag's soul. Lasers lack the intuition to preempt fatigue ghosts. Economics sealed the tomb. Pittsburgh's Bessemer mills shuttered in the 80s. Their Bessemer converters, roaring cauldrons birthing pencil-thin warriors, replaced by electric arc furnaces spitting uniform ingots for automotive stampings, not bridge bowels. Galvanizing baths, once zinc infernos curing sacrificial skins strand by strand, yielded to continuous line dip tanks optimized for rebar volume, skimping on the thick mil-spec coatings that arm the Golden Gate against fog's eternal siege. Cost per ton plummeted for disposables. A modern cable strand runs 1.20 per meter, pre-tensioned and shipped. The depression equivalent, hand-spun, tallied $4 million per cable in today's dollars, but lasting 900 years versus 50. ROI calculators recoil, Shareholders demand capex amortized over life cycles too brief for permanence. Plastic enters the farce. High modulus polyethylene stays in pedestrian spans, touted for sustainability, until UV degradation brittles them into confetti after 15 monsoons. Aluminum alloys lighten towers, but thermal creep warps them under cyclic solar loads, demanding midlife overhauls the old granite-faced monoliths scoff at. The soul's absence damns these husks most brutally. Cross a new suspension like the Öresund, sleek, sensor-studded, and it feels clinical. A video game over water, deck rigid under servo dampers that neuter the wind's symphony. No heave of mass harmonizing with gales, no visceral thrum of 11,000 tons suspended by human heresy. Corrosion manifests not as noble patina, but as lawsuit fodder. Zinc flakes expose cores to hydrogen embrittlement, fatigue cracks propagating unseen until drones detect the death rattle. Replacements? Scheduled, inevitable. Cables helicoptered out in modules, landfilled as legacy waste, while consultants invoice the cradle-to-grave carbon footprint. The Golden Gate's cables, compacted by manual presses into unyielding cylinders, derive eternity from excess. 27,572 strands mean 27,572 chances for one to slacken unnoticed, yet the weave conceals and compensates, a biological resilience algorithms ape but never embody. Modernity's minimalism, fewer, fatter strands for weight savings, courts cascade failure. One fracture overloads neighbors in domino doom. Cynicism veils a deeper rot. We've unlearned peril's pedagogy. Those depression men, bodies as the final tensioner, attuned to physics as lovers to breath. We delegate to dashboards, mistaking data for dominion. Spreadsheet sorcerers crunch life cycle costs, decreeing total cost of ownership favors the ephemeral, but ignore the blood metric, the human forge that annealed immortality. Plastic dashboards, MBA metrics, regulatory straitjackets. These are the chains binding us from the Pharaoh Antigo's truth. We build not beasts but baubles, destined for scrapyards while the Golden Gate endures, its strands a silent rebuke. In forsaking the trap, we trapped ourselves in transience, dooming spans to dust while profits phantom feasts. Word count, 872. Yet the Golden Gate endures, a rust-veined patriarch straddling the bay's eternal rage, its cables unbowed after 90 years of unrelenting siege. Those 27,572 strands per main cable, each a pencil-thin testament to Peril's forge, still shoulder 11,000 tons of deck without a full swap, shrugging off the 1989 Loma Prieta quake's seismic tantrum that crumpled freeways like tin foil. While routine inspections reveal only surface patina, the galvanized cores as taut as the day the last mallet fell. Fog's salt breath has etched zinc sacrifices into lunar landscapes, yet the helical weave distributes corrosion's creep like a forest canopy sharing storm loads, inner strands shielded by outer martyrs, in a geometry of mutual guardianship no factory extrusion can mimic. Tourists throng its span daily, semis thunder across in convoys heavy as ironclad dreadnoughts, and when gales claw at 100 miles per hour, the deck sways not in frailty, but in resonant defiance, mass and multiplicity converting chaos into cadence. This isn't preservation by neglect. Periodic wraps of fresh galvanizing and epoxy injections sustain the beast, but the skeleton, the hand-aligned bundle, needs no resurrection. It functions, defying entropy with the stubborn inertia of its birth weight, a colossus that outlasts the empires of code and capital. What ghosts does it summon from the abyss? Lessons carved not in plaques, but in the physics of sacrifice. True durability demands excess, the redundancy of 27,572 lives woven against one failure's cascade. We gaze upward at those throbbing arteries and glimpse the Pharaoh Antigo's creed, immortality extracted from mortality's vice, where human frailty annealed steel into eternity. The men of 1937, dangling in their bosun chairs amid whipping wires, taught that engineering's pinnacle lies not in simulation but in submersion, bodies as the ultimate tension gauge, feeling the wires whisper before it screamed. Their blood, splattered across catwalks netted in near misses, or lost to the Pacific's jaws, purchased a permanence we squander in sterile boardrooms. Society's modern incapacity to replicate stems from a deeper atrophy. We've excised the visceral right, trading calloused intuition for cursor clicks, Perel's pedagogy for padded protocols. No algorithm intuits the subtle kink in a strand's soul. No drone mallet thumps a bundle into helical harmony. The spinning wheels, those inertia-wrestling behemoths shuttled 14,000 times across the Gulf, embodied a manual precision born of breadline desperation, phaser, humorer, and we've orphaned it to OSHA edicts and ROI spreadsheets that deem such inefficiency obsolete. Probe deeper, and the philosophy darkens. The Golden Gate indicts our civilizational drift toward disposability, where profit's shadow eclipses permanence's light. Those depression haulers, riveting towers with white-hot fury while winds flayed their flesh, built for legacy because survival brooked no quarter-life amortization. Today's spans, sleek pretenders in Asia's megacities or Europe's tollways, crumble under the same elemental onslaughts, their parallel strand cables fracturing in fatigue cascades after mere decades, demanding billion-dollar retrofits that funnel taxpayer blood into consultant coffers. Why? Because we worship the ephemeral god of growth, engineering bridges as mere assets on balance sheets, engineered to fail just post-warranty, their lightweight alloys and polymer veils mere costumes for inevitable entropy. The old iron knew better. Mass mocks decay, multiplicity thwarts rupture and the human toll, exhaustion etching hollows in cheeks, wires lashing torsos like divine whips, forges bonds unbreakable by boardroom decree. We've grown too tender for such truth. Our engineers, MBA anointed, hands soft from keyboards, blind to the first law of the long span. What endures exacts everything. Cross the Golden Gate at dusk, when the sun bleeds orange into the fog-choked strait, and feel the deck's subtle pulse underfoot, the thrum of cables compressed by manual presses into cylinders denser than geological grudge. Vehicles hum overhead, oblivious to the abyss yawning 220 meters below, yet the structure harmonizes, its inertia a bulwark against the wind's howl that once hurled workers into nets like discarded prayers. This is the legacy. A machine that teaches durability's dialectic, where Lucro's siren song lures us to lightness and loss. Profit decrees the new and now, birthing baubles that rust to irrelevance while starving the soul of craft. Permanence, conversely, hungers for the full measure, time in torrents, money in magnitudes, blood in unblinking tribute. The 27,572 strand trap endures because it was trapped in turn by men's unyielding will, a steel sacrament whispering across the decades. We could rebuild it tomorrow, but we won't. Not for lack of steel or science, but for want of the wild heart that once wrestled gods. In its shadow, modernity cowers, our span's fleeting footnotes to the Pharaoh Antigo's epic, dooming us to rebuild what they built once, perfectly, amid the storm. The bridge stands eternal, not as relic, but as reckoning. Choose profit, and perish in pieces. Embrace the price and span the void forever.